Over the past 2 years, the world has been consumed by the promise of a magic injectable pen. One dose a week and the fat melts away. That is the story the media told you. But inside doctors' offices, a bizarre phenomenon, undocumented on the original label, began to terrify and fascinate neuroscientists. Patients weren't just giving up food. Longtime alcoholics stopped drinking overnight. Casino addicts lost the urge to gamble. Compulsive shoppers abandoned their virtual carts. This drug isn't just shrinking stomachs. It is crossing the blood-brain barrier and hacking the human brain's reward system. In today's video, we are going to explore the dark neuroscience behind how a diabetes injection is accidentally rewiring human personality.
To understand what is happening with Ozempic users, we need to dissect the engine of human desire, the ventral tegmental area, or VTA. This is the neurological structure responsible for synthesizing dopamine, the neurotransmitter that orchestrates our reward system. Every time an individual consumes hyperprocessed sugar, drinks alcohol, or wins a bet, the VTA triggers a flood of dopamine toward the nucleus accumbens. It is this neural pathway that consolidates the addiction cycle and compulsive behavior. What researchers discovered almost by accident is that semaglutide doesn't just stay in your stomach. It manages to cross the brain's security wall and go straight into the control room of this reward engine. The drug acts like a mechanic, pulling the handbrake on addiction.
Neuropharmacological trials, like those conducted by researchers at the University of Gothenburg in Sweden, proved this in practice. They tested the drug on animals with severe alcohol addiction. The result? The desperation for the next dose simply vanished. Semaglutide doesn't take away the ability to feel pleasure, but it prevents the addiction accelerator from being pressed to the floor. That screaming voice of compulsion turns into just a silent whisper. But biology refuses to be silenced forever. The great mistake of our current culture and the dark detail that internet influencers ignore is what happens when the pen runs dry. The human body is a stubborn survival machine. When you stop the semaglutide injection, that chemical handbrake is released in an uncontrolled manner. Rigorous clinical studies reveal that upon stopping the treatment, most patients regain up to 2/3 of the weight in just 1 year. And the scariest part isn't the scale, it's the mind. Without the artificial block, dopamine receptors wake up in a state of starvation. The food noise doesn't just come back, it comes back with a vengeance, an effect known as rebound hyperphagia. The voice of compulsion, which was a whisper while on the drug, turns into a deafening scream inside the brain. And while the mind suffers in withdrawal, the body exacts a hidden toll. To force satiety, the drug almost paralyzes digestion, which has led to severe cases of gastroparesis, the chronic paralysis of the stomach. Furthermore, up to 40% of the weight lost by some patients isn't fat, but rather vital muscle mass and bone density. This causes the infamous Ozempic face, a structural melting that rapidly ages the face by about a decade. The magic cure for obesity is, in reality, a biological loan with sky-high interest rates. If the impact on the individual body is already terrifying, the global scale impact is causing a true corporate panic. What happens when millions of consumers simultaneously have their reward systems chemically silenced? That supermarket aisle, which was once a minefield of colorful temptations, suddenly becomes just a sterile and utterly dull warehouse. The multi-billion-dollar ultra-processed food industry spent decades perfecting what food engineering calls the bliss point, the mathematically exact ratio of salt, sugar, and fat designed to maximize the dopamine spike in your ventral tegmental area. But semaglutide has rendered the bliss point completely useless for these patients.
The impact is so brutal that mega retailers, like the CEO of the American Walmart himself, have come forward to report a radical behavioral shift. Their data shows that customers on treatment are buying a much lower volume of food and almost completely abandoning empty calories. For the first time in modern history, the junk food industry's biggest enemy isn't a public health campaign, but a synthetic peptide that simply turned off the desire to eat.
In the end, the promise of a miracle injection collides with the oldest and most unforgiving rule of nature. There is no evolutionary shortcut without a toll. We are not curing humanity's lack of willpower. We are simply renting a temporary thinness at an incredibly high physical cost, outsourcing our reward system to a pharmaceutical lab. And as science has already proven, when the last drop of the drug runs out, your body's biology calls in that debt with heavy interest. The semaglutide revolution has laid bare that we are just chemical machines, vulnerable to a simple lab hack. But to what extent is it worth silencing our own desires in exchange for a reflection in the mirror?
Does the risk of the brain and muscle rebound really justify the aesthetic result?